Welcome to the Action Network studio in New York City. I'm Maria Marino, and this is Green Dot Daily. We're live every weekday at 3 Eastern on the Action app. And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you're subscribed to our channel. Coming up on the show, Zerillo gives us his best bets across MLB today. And later, I chop it up with Brendan Glasheen on the WNBA and even share my pick for tonight. But we start with a whole lot of college football. And check out our Action Top 8. Brett McMurphy's AP ballot had Texas ranked number 1 and Florida State number 2, followed by Georgia. Meanwhile, Collin Wilson's betting power rank has Georgia number 1, then Ohio State 2, and Texas number 3. So let's bring in Brett and Collin now. Good to see you both. Why don't we set the stage for this coming weekend? Brett, plenty of ranked games with heavy playoff and or Heisman implications. What do we need to know going in?
Yeah, I mean, look, people that don't like the fact that we don't have a 12-team playoff until next year, this is your quarterfinal round of the playoffs. We've got 6 games against ranked opponents. That does not even include Florida State and Clemson. And basically, for the losers of all these games, your playoff hopes are eliminated. Now, there's some potential scenarios where a couple of them could win out. Realistically, though, they're out. So this is your quarterfinal round of the playoffs. And also, Maria, as far as the Heisman goes, on the BBOC a couple weeks ago, I told everyone, if you like Texas to beat Alabama, then make a play on Quinn Ewers to win the Heisman before that game, because his odds are only going to drop after that game. Here's a couple of guys also that you should look at. If you like them to win the Heisman, you need to get them before Saturday. Travis Jordan of Florida State, Bo Nix at Oregon. If you like Kyle McCord at Ohio State, take a flyer on him before Notre Dame if you think they're going to win the game. Sam Hartman with Notre Dame, obviously his numbers are going to drop if they can beat the Buckeyes. And then for Penn State, Drew Aller, also another guy whose numbers are only going to drop after this weekend. So if you like any of these starting quarterbacks in these ranked matchups to win the Heisman, put a little play on them before Saturday, because the number's only going to get worse.
All right, you heard him. We're all on high alert now. Get it right now before it's too late. And Collin, speaking of bets, what are you looking at heading into the weekend?
Well, let's go to one of these quarterfinal games, which there's a ton of them this weekend, but that is Alabama and Ole Miss, and there is a lot of offensive questions coming into this game. From the Ole Miss side, they have injuries. Wide receiver Trey Harris is their most explosive target. He's hurt. We don't know if he's going to play. And then Quinshon Judkins went through some injury, some pain, averaged 2.8 yards per carry against Georgia Tech. And then there's Lane Kiffin making up stories about how Alabama has different defensive play callers. It could be their secondaries coach. It could be Kevin Steele. We all know each other around here in these walls. So obviously I think there's a different thing going on with the Alabama defense. So there's a lot of offensive questions for Ole Miss. And then you switch over to Alabama. It's just purely on the grid. It's been bad. The offensive line play has been bad. The quarterback play has been bad. Offensive coordinator Tommy Rees is still calling an offense for a drop back passer. And that's just not what Jalen Milroe is now that he's the starter. So I'm taking the first half under 27.5 on Ole Miss, Alabama in this quarterfinal game.
More questions surrounding Alabama than we've probably seen in quite some time. Brett, what about you? Is there a game that you're picking this weekend?
Yeah, one of the games I mentioned, Oregon and Colorado. Look, Oregon has put up 81, 38, and 55 points so far this season. Colorado is a 3-touchdown underdog. A lot of people are going to get suckered into that. It's not enough points. Look, Colorado has been amazing through the first 3 weeks, but they're coming off 3 monster high-profile games and also a double overtime game against Colorado State. I don't know what they have left in the tank. Oregon will not take their foot off the pedal. Also, Colorado has offensive line issues. Their best offensive and defensive player, Travis Hunter, is not playing in the game. And then on top of that, Colorado has one of the nation's worst rushing attacks and also one of the nation's worst defenses. Unlike TCU, Nebraska, and Colorado State, Oregon is not going to have self-inflicted wounds. They will score over 100 very easily, and I like the Ducks to cover the 21.
It seems like it could be the weekend that Colorado comes down to earth a little bit. Collin, anything else that you like before we go?
Yeah, I think one thing I want to mention to tag along to Brett is that there's a stat called offensive momentum killer, and it's just how fluid is your offense. And Oregon is number one in the nation. I'm going to use that stat on Friday night when Boise State plays San Diego State. And offensive momentum killer is how many 10-yard penalties do you have? How many fourth down stops, turnovers, missed field goals? Boise State is a far superior team on the offensive side than San Diego State. San Diego State has been horrific in scoring position, 22 opportunities. They average just 3 points per trip past the 40-yard line. There's a massive difference in strength of schedule, strength of record here. Boise has huge advantages in all the areas that you need. Special teams, third downs, middle eight, scoring. It's all there. I'm going to take Boise State -6.5 on Friday night.
All right, well, we appreciate the insight from you both. I have to say, no offense to Brett, but Collin, that background is just superb. But guys, thanks so much for joining Green Dot Daily. Sticking with college football, here are the latest odds to win a national title. Georgia, seeking a third straight title, leads the pack at +200. Michigan, a close second at +400. Then Ohio State, Texas, and Florida State are all tied at +1,000. Let's welcome in senior reporter for Vegas Insider, Patrick Everson. Patrick, good to see you. You've got a new article out today about college football playoff odds. It's been the hot topic around here, but justifiably so. Colorado, is Coach Prime helping them just eclipse every other team right now?
He's not only helped them eclipse every other team right now, he's been doing this for months, Maria. The money's been rolling in on Colorado futures and on Heisman odds, and now over the last 3 weeks, week to week. But speaking specifically to the college football playoff national championship odds, I talked just a couple days ago with Joey Fiesel at Caesar Sports, where Colorado opened 300-1. The Buffalo is now 60-1, still long shot-ish. However, when you start looking at the number of teams ahead of them, there's only 13 teams ahead of them on the odds board at Caesars. And again, Joey Fiesel, he said in comparing last season's 1-11 Buffaloes, by the way, my Buffaloes, proud alum here, didn't necessarily buy into all this, but we'll see what happens this weekend. But what he said regarding last season's 1-11 Buffs, they were one of the worst teams in the nation. He said it's night and day. You're talking about a Colorado team that was near the bottom of the FBS last season. And now it's such a complete 180, and Colorado by far is still the biggest liability at Caesars, probably at FanDuel, DraftKings, wherever you go bet MGM, they're going to be a huge liability everywhere.
The turnaround as far as narrative with this program has just been unprecedented. A couple of our experts here at Action Network, though, have been skeptical of Colorado going into this weekend against Oregon. What have you learned about that matchup, which has obviously been highly publicized?
Right. This is when I went back and forth with Zachary Lucas, who's director of retail sports at Twin Spires. He noted they went Oregon -20 to -20.5 pretty quickly. Then moved out to -21, so 3 touchdowns now, as Collin was discussing there with Brett. But even with those moves toward the Ducks, early bet count, early money on the spread is predominantly Colorado. 3-1 tickets, 2.5-1 money in this case. Further, Zach told me Colorado will likely be that book, and probably every book's biggest liability on the money line. It's going to be it'll be the biggest liability. The Colorado money line will be the biggest liability on Saturday. And in fact, kind of interestingly, even though the spread has gone up a point toward Oregon, at Twin Spires, the money line has gone down, has shortened toward Colorado from +700 to +650, which I thought was kind of an interesting point and almost serves as exactly what Zach was pointing out, that the money line is going to be hugely tilted towards Colorado when they're actually kind of shortening Colorado's price, even though the spread has gone up.
I'm sure just so many bets coming in on them. What are some other notable Week 4 matchups in terms of line movement?
Well, I think Ohio State Notre Dame obviously is a huge one. And really, it's the line movement that's occurred from the preseason to now. And I actually did, Collin Wilson, your first guest, up at the top of the hour here. He and I did kind of an impromptu video at Circa Sportsbook during the Notre Dame Navy game when Notre Dame just wiped out Navy. Now, granted, it's Navy, not a super strong opponent, but Notre Dame looked good and has continued to look good. And what Collin said during that video was, when this game reopens, if you could have gotten this preseason games of the year and so forth, you could have gotten Ohio State. It would have been at like Ohio State 6.5, 7, 7.5. He said, when this reopens, it's going to be more like 4, 4.5. It ends up being 3, 3.5, Maria, which I think Collin is thrilled about because I think he wants Ohio State in this game. But it's an interesting matchup, of course, and it's going to decide a lot. It's going to go a long way toward creating more CFP talk. But Zach told me, again, Zachary Lucas at Twin Spires, he said this is a pros versus Joes game. With that number as low as it is, the sharp players are on the Buckeyes at a far better number than they could have gotten in the preseason or game of the year odds. And then Florida State Clemson, real quickly here. Clemson no longer ranked, Florida number 4, but Florida's opening number was 1.5 point favorite against unranked Clemson. Zach said that's up to 2.5 now. A little sharp action early on Florida State, but he said the public is backing the Seminoles early on as well.
Fascinating reporting. Patrick Everson, thank you so much for the time. Look forward to having you on again soon.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Great to be on.
To baseball, let's get a market report for 2 significant games in the National League wildcard race. 65% of bets and 75% of money is on Miami against the Mets. Marlins, a half game back of the Cubs, who sit in the 3rd wildcard spot. 90% of bets, but just 56% of money is on Chicago, taking on the Pirates. Our MLB expert, Sean Zerillo, joins us now. Sean, good to have you back on GDD. And you have picks on both of the aforementioned games, so please share.
Yeah, I have a ticket on the Marlins to miss the playoffs, I believe, which I gave out on Green.Daily in the middle of the season. So going against that ticket directly tonight, hopefully the Marlins don't end up making the playoffs ultimately, but projected the Marlins closer to -130 in both halves tonight, both the first 5 in the full game. Would bet either line up to about -120. Make these two offenses about the same. The Marlins do have the bullpen advantage. I also think the starting pitching matchup is pretty comparable. And, you know, how you handicap that basically determines whether or not you see an edge on this matchup. A lot of people have talked about Kodai Senga as a potential NL Cy Young candidate. Well, Yuri Perez, I think, is going to be an NL Cy Young candidate in the future, maybe in 2024, but definitely beyond that point. This kid is a young phenom, and his pitch modeling metrics as the season has progressed, they shut him down for a little bit, but they brought him back. And he's showing the best stuff plus and the best command that he's shown all season. So even though his results in September, the box scores don't necessarily look quite as good as they did in August, Yuri Perez actually throwing the ball as well as he has all season. And on the other end of the matchup, Kodai Senga, his stats have gotten better throughout the season, but his location plus, the underlying command metric, has actually stayed steady at about 6 points below the major league average throughout the season. So view Yuri Perez as a comparable pitcher, if not a slightly better pitcher even, than Kodai Senga, and give the Marlins the pitching edge throughout this matchup. So Miami up to -120 in either half. Certainly bets for me tonight.
Riding with the Marlins, at least for tonight. But the other game I mentioned, Cubs-Pirates, what do you think about that one?
Yeah, taking the under here. And this game triggered one of our Action Lab systems, one of our most profitable Action Lab systems, and one I certainly pay attention to. Now, I am not a system bettor. Sometimes I've even gone against this system in the past, but I did align with the under today, this Action Lab system, which since 2005 has basically generated a 15% ROI and hit at a 60% rate. And it's, you know, when you're handicapping games at Wrigley Field, oftentimes you wake up early in the morning, you check the weather, and only 1 or 2 books have a line out because a lot of books are hesitant to release totals for Wrigley Field overnight. They want to see the weather on the day of the game and get a bit more of a refined line. Well, one book had an 8.5 out, a bunch of other books had an 8, and I projected this total closer to 7.25. So was happy to take that 8.5. The market has actually moved all the way down to 7.5 at this point. If you can get even money on under 7.5, I would certainly take that. This should be a really good matchup for Justin Steele. The Pirates have brought up a lot of young kids this year, and it has been a difficult team to project as a result. But the Pirates have struggled against left-handed pitching since they brought all those rookies up. They rank as a bottom 5 offense against left-handed pitching at about 22% below the major league average. So provided the Cubs don't cover this over on their own tonight, which they ended up doing last night, I like the under again tonight at Wrigley Field, and hopefully this game stays 4-3 or lower.
All right, under 8 runs for Cubs and Pirates. Sean Zerillo, always great to see you. Thanks again for joining the show. To WNBA playoffs. After thrilling games last night, we know 3 of our 4 semifinalists. Liberty will play the winner of the Sun and Lynx, who face off tonight in Minnesota, while the number 4 seeded Wings will visit the top seeded Aces on Sunday afternoon. With that, we say hello to our friend Brendan Glasheen. Brendan, it's so great to see you. I've been waiting so long to talk W with you on GDD. Look, you know him from Action Network. He was sitting in this chair last week. He's also the play-by-play voice of the Connecticut Sun. How we doing today?
I am doing great. I'm glad to see you made it home from parts unknown. And yeah, we got quite the treat last night. 2 great games. And I'll have to be honest with you, Maria, I am nervous about what might take place tonight in Minnesota.
Okay, we're going to get to that in just a second. But
Okay.
you mentioned me making it home. I was a little later than usual last night coming home from Brooklyn because we had an OT game. The Liberty just outlasting the Washington Mystics. What did you make of that?
Wow. Lot to unpack there. Great basketball game. The back and forth between Natasha Cloud and Sabrina Ionescu going into the game gave it a lot of juice, and Natasha Cloud backed it up. A career high in scoring, was a pest defensively. I don't think she guarded Sabrina all 45 minutes of the basketball game, but pretty close to it. And Breanna Stewart was bound for a bounce-back game. Jacquel Jones, big offensive rebound after the missed free throws by Ionescu, which was just stunning. 91% free throw shooter in her career, misses 2 down the stretch. But hats off to Washington. They had a great year, injury-riddled season. No Shakira Austin in that series, but I think I was impressed with New York, how they stayed poised down the stretch. They didn't panic. There were some moments where turnover here, turnover there, but at the end of the day, they got the job done. That was a fascinating basketball game last night. Really interesting to see. This is down the road, but what Washington does now in the offseason, they've got a ton of unrestricted free agents coming up here. So who knows what it means for the Tebows and company, how they're going to run that team. But New York's moving on.
Moving on, wild game. To be fair, I really do think that the Washington Mystics, when mostly healthy, I know they're still missing Austin, are far better than a 7 seed. Kind of a tough draw. In my opinion, for New York in the first round. Also, Dallas Wings moving on. Quick thought on that?
Well, they did not look great the first half on Friday night. And wow, they carried their momentum from the second half of that game and just completely throttled Atlanta, really gave them no chance to feel in that game. Oh, first quarter was sort of close, but then Dallas pulled away. I love their size. That series between the Wings and the Aces is going to be a lot closer than I think folks think, because Dallas has enough depth in their front court to throw different looks at A'ja Wilson. If she does indeed, A'ja Wilson, if she wins MVP of the league, this series is going to me really prove to the league that she is the best player in the league and she is MVP caliber, because they're going to need A'ja Wilson to A, stay out of foul trouble, and B, she's going to get worn down, in my opinion, when she faces that front court. And that's no knock on her. They can throw so many different looks. You've got Arike, Satu having an unbelievable year, fully healthy. Dallas looks really good. And I think this was, I know Dano's been on these shows leading into this postseason. And just as recently as last week, he was with you yesterday. He's been on the Dallas train. And when this team's right and they're consistent, which is the key in a playoff series, especially where it can go back and forth, they are scary.
They are scary, both offensively, scoring 100 points, plus last night for the 10th time this season, and then also defensively. You mentioned that size down low. If there's anything that can possibly try to disrupt A'ja Wilson, it's that size. So they are dangerous for sure. But let's get to the game tonight. I know you're nervous. I'm nervous too, because I got to pick on this one. So I'm going to share that with you, and then I'll get your reaction. Sound good?
Sounds great. Let's do it.
All right, here we go. So I took your Connecticut Sun -4.5 at Minnesota. That line is now moved to 5.5. I still feel pretty good about it. Admittedly, not as good. But here's my thinking. It is, in my opinion, a much bigger motivational spot for Connecticut than it is Minnesota. Connecticut's the team with all the expectations, and I know that sometimes that can bring extra pressure, but this is a team that feeds off that pressure. Alyssa Thomas, I just picture her pissed. That entire plane ride on the way to Minnesota, a plane ride that frankly shouldn't have happened. I mean, this is a team that blew out Minnesota by 30 points in the first game. Second game, Minnesota played their best possible game, and still Connecticut got within 3 points. You had Kayla McBride and Nafisa Collier combined for 50-plus points. As great as they both have been, don't think I see that happening again. You have, like I said, with Alyssa Thomas, I just don't see her as this MVP candidate allowing this team to lose. And I think they can win, by more than 6 or so points. So that's what I'm thinking. Stephanie White, Coach of the Year, Sun franchise best, 27 wins this season. Like, it would be a momentous disappointment shocker if the Connecticut Sun, who are easily the third best team in the league, if they do not advance to the next round.
I'd agree. This is championship or bust time for this core. That's why they brought in Tiffany Hayes in the offseason on a 1-year deal after making a trade of their first round pick. Beck Allen, who you're familiar with with her time in New York. Yeah, look, I'll say this. I mean, I think you said it. The line moved to 5.5, so you should feel good if you got 4.5. That means the line is moving towards Connecticut. They've been a good road team. They've had a great home court advantage. I think it's pretty well documented. Those not familiar with the W, Uncasville is not an easy place to get to, and typically Connecticut has thrived on that. They've won 80% of their home games in the last 6 years, but this season they have been resilient on the road. 14-6 on the road this year. They've got nice wins on the road this season, including a couple against Dallas. They beat Washington in a nail biter on the road. Both times they played Washington on the road, they came down to the wire, and they beat this Minnesota team in the 2 tries they had at Target Center. So I hear you. What fascinates me, Maria, it's such a small sample because these are best of 3 series, and the higher seed, which talk a number, I know that could be confusing. So in this case, the lower seed Minnesota, they're going to get home court in this spot. To me, it feels like this is, and it's only 2 games. It's a shooting regression series. Minnesota couldn't make anything from the ocean in game 1. Connecticut makes 16 threes. I didn't expect them to do that in game 2. What does Kayla McBride do? She's been damn good against the Sun this year. 6 of 11 from deep in game 2. And Connecticut only made 7, and they shot 35%, which is still a pretty good clip on a night-to-night basis. I expect Minnesota to take a dip in their shooting production. If Kayla McBride doesn't shoot well, they don't, and they don't have much of a shot. Now, I will say Nafisa Collier will get hers. To me, it's about, can Minnesota, outside of McBride and Collier, get other contributions? And I've still yet to see that on a consistent basis over the course of the year. Whereas Connecticut, I can pretty much book 5 to 6 players. Of those 5 or 6, 4 are going to show up. So of course I don't mind your pick. I'm biased, but I think this is going to be a fight for a half, and then DeWanna Bonner down the stretch. Tiffany Hayes through contact has been amazing. I'm fascinated by the shooting ups and downs for both of these teams in this series.
Well, you mentioned a couple of the savvy veterans on Connecticut, and meanwhile on the other side with Minnesota, you have 2 key players that are rookies. I'm not saying they haven't been great all year. They have. I'm just counting on the Connecticut Sun more in this spot with much more at stake and much more to lose. Brendan Glasheen, it's been a blast. I could go on and on with you talking W, but we got to say goodbye.
I really hope for our sake that we're doing this again next week.
Yes.
And Connecticut is heading to Barclays. I hope that is the case, because that will be spicy and juicy.
Yes,
Thank you for having me.
And of course, hopefully my Action app record will get a boost after later, but should be a great game.
Go Sun.
Remember, any picks we give out here on the show, you can easily reference by following Green Dot Daily in the Action app. As I mentioned, we keep track so you don't have to. And that's all for Green Dot Daily. Once again, I'm Maria Marino. Thank you for hanging with me, and I'll see you again tomorrow at 3 Eastern on the Action Network YouTube channel and the Action app.